Hi. You're going to need headphones for this one because it's about Quasar, a spatial binaural panner designed to make mixes wider, in particular giving you the experience of a three-dimensional musical environment around you. Unlike regular stereo panning, where levels are balanced between left and right channels, binaural panning applies various filtering techniques, making it sound as if the elements of your mix come from anywhere you like, all around, near and far, above or below you. In this video, I'll take a close look at Quasar, explore a few other elements of this setup, and overall pros and cons of binaural mixing in general, and this module in particular. Before I start, a quick disclosure. Neuzeit Instruments sent Quasar over for review, but as always, they have no say over the content of this video. This channel is funded by viewers who subscribe to my content and book updates on Patreon, YouTube Premium and ads, and price check affiliate links in the description, which help the channel regardless of the product you choose to buy. Okay, let's get started. Quasar is a Eurorack module, though you could put it in a small case if you wanted to use it with a DAW-less setup, as it's got quite a bit of gain on the inputs and headphone outputs. It has two 3D or binaural panners called Quasars here. You feed them each a monophonic audio source, and they can then spin that audio 360 degrees around you and move it up and down as well. I'll demonstrate this in depth later on, but just to cover the basics, I've got a melody programmed by Precision Disruptor going into Reverb, which is a Platts-based module. Anyway, I'll go into Quasar 1. This audio is being fed into Quasar 1. And you can see the rotation here on the horizontal plane. And you can disable rotation and spin it manually. Behind you, to your left, up front. Let's get rotation going again. Then you've got control over height, second dimension. I think a little bit less noticeable here. We'll listen to this later on with noise, where it might be easier to perceive. And then the final dimension is distance, up to 10 meters, all the way as close as 20 centimeters, a bit under a foot. And then you've got a room reverb, with various controls over the room size and damping. Anyway, those are the three parameters that you control, three basic parameters you control along with reverb. And you've got two of these Quasars. So going into Quasar 2 through CVilization working as a mixer is noise, and I can get a hi-hat pattern going. So let's just hear the hi-hats. And the noise mixed in, going into Quasar 2. Again, auto rotation here, control of height, and reverb as well if I wanted. Yeah, and these two Quasars can rotate simultaneously. Aside from the auto panning or auto rotation that both Quasars have an LFO that can be pointed at multiple destinations, including height, distance, and so on. The LFOs can also be set to envelope mode and then triggered using the CV inputs. The CV inputs can also be set to control a number of destinations. The module is fairly easy to use, in my opinion. There's just a single menu level, so not much diving to be done here. Once you enter a menu, you edit two parameters at a time, like I showed you before, using these two encoders, and the values are shown here. When you haven't selected any of the items in the menu, when you're sort of in the main menu, then these two rings show you levels on the right and left. So right levels, for example, here, that's my noise, and I can reduce gain to 0. It's my spinning noise, and then my melody. It's level on the left. As long as you're in the blue zone, it's fine. And on the right is output levels, left and right. All three encoders are also clickable, which is mainly useful for the parameter encoder. You've got gain controls for each of the two inputs, and then level controls for both Quasars, and then a center channel, which isn't panned at all. The OLED display is very crisp and sharp. It's small, but you're only editing 2 parameters at a time, so it's not too bad. Overall, that's pretty much it. The module is very easy to use. Usually when I explore modules, I see how far I can go without the manual and then look for what I missed. It's a testament to this interface that you can pretty much figure out everything on your own. So that's it for the overview. Let's dive in a little bit deeper into this spatial business. If you didn't yet, put on your headphones and let's take a listen to how this works. So let's take a look at this on the scopes. I'll lift the center channel up so you can see on both left and right scopes what pink noise looks like. This is white noise, by the way. We'll try that later on for a bit. Anyway, so that's the raw, unprocessed audio. And if we listen to Quasar 2, you can see already on the scopes that what we're getting is very different from the clean pink noise in this case. And if we dive in and start rotating the sound around, now it's in front of you. Rotate it to the right and back. You can both hear and see the processing on the scopes. Let's take a listen to height. Should be hearing this from up top. Then below you. So quite a bit of filtering. Let's do again 0 height. And I mentioned the third dimension is distance. Let's get about 3.5 meters away. So that's pretty much what binaural panning does as far as it applies to noise, of course. Add some reverb. Not that noticeable on noise. Let's explore the same thing with melodic content. Again, spin it around us, behind us, coming up on our left. Front, height, can you hear the difference? And distance, room reverb, and room size. Poorly treated room and a well-treated room, I guess. Again, pretty straightforward. That's how this works. And obviously when we set it in motion, that's where things get more interesting. Now, aside from the 3 or 4 parameters that I showed you, there's actually one more interesting aspect of the algorithm that you have control over, and that's how extreme the module is when it applies its binaural processing, or as it's called here, the shape of your ears. So I've been assuming that you've got human ears, but there are 4 other options here, all the way from hobbit through Yoda to bunny to elephant. Let's maybe go for the extreme processing, elephant ears. It takes a few seconds to load the algorithm. Now, I won't repeat the entire demo, but let's maybe listen to the melodic content with elephant ears. Go ahead on auto rotation. Maybe height is more discernible with this because the processing is more extreme. That's height, distance, room. So that's the melodic content. Let's listen to noise. That's in Quasar 2. I've got hi-hats here as well, but we can turn them down. And yeah, auto angle, spinning counterclockwise with elephant ears. Height. Up high. Down low. And then distance. And close. So that's the most extreme elephant algorithm. So those are the basics of binaural panning on Quasar. Let's take a brief look at how audio flows through the module. You send audio in through these inputs, like I mentioned earlier. There's analog gain for each input. And from that point on, you also have control over filtering and destinations for each of the inputs. So for each of the inputs, you can either apply a low-pass filter or a high-pass filter. So let's maybe take a listen to input 2, where noise is coming in. You've got control over levels to Quasar 1. That's set to 0 because I'm only pointing it to Quasar 2. So let's skip through all of these to center as well. And then filtering for Quasar 2. Low pass. And high pass. Basic filtering. So you could, for example, send the bass only to the center if you didn't want it panned, and send the highs to the Quasars. So that's pretty much the control that you have over the inputs. And then if we dive a little deeper into motion, there are 4 ways you can move the binaural panners around. I've shown you the manual option and then the auto rotate option. Let's go for Quasar 2. So you've got speed control over that. Okay. As stormy as this weather gets. That's for the auto rotation. And let's say we cancel the auto rotation. Bring this up front. Take a look at the LFO. So LFO has a few shapes, its own speed as well, and destinations. So here, aside from angle, you've got height control. And if I page back to the angle and height page, you'll be able to see this modulation. The LFO modulate both angle and height very subtly based on the mod depth. Anyway, back to the LFO. Mod depth for distance as well. In a few actions, you can copy the LFO from one quasar to the other or mirror the LFOs. And the LFO shapes are sine, cosine, triangle, ramp up, ramp down, and then CV triggered LFOs, which are basically envelopes. Same shapes. So that is the LFO. That's the third option to move things around. Then the final and fourth option is the CV inputs, CV1 and CV2, assignable again to multiple targets. Quasar 1, Quasar 2, height, angle, distance, room. Hopefully you can see this on camera. And a bunch of other things. Plenty of mod destinations here. Including, like I mentioned earlier, the ability to trigger the LFO when it's in one-shot mode. So those are pretty much the options of the module. If I go into the More menu, that's where I chose the ear type. Let's set it back to human. Again, takes a few seconds to load. And other options here are loading or saving presets. There are a few factory presets, and you can save up to, I think, 128 presets, plenty of presets. So that's very convenient if you've got a setting that you like. And that's pretty much it as far as the important stuff about this module. So before we head out to the pros and cons, just a few words both about this setup and just tips I picked up as I was using this. First, since you only have 2 panners, if you have more than 2 audio sources, like I do, say hi-hats from NerdSeq and noise coming in from Noise Tools, then you can use a mixer prior to sending audio into the input to control those levels, and then obviously that gets panned together as a mix. Next tip regarding effects. Here too, it really matters if effects are pre-processing or post-processing, which generally post-processing effects aren't recommended if they change the timbre of the audio. So for example, here I've got Reverb going through Tapographic Delay, which is messing around with the sound quite considerably. All that's being fed into the input. So whatever magic this does gets spun around in a pretty uniform way. So if you're planning to mess with the spectrum in any way, distortion, reverb, you might want to put that before you send audio into the module. However, if you've got an effect that doesn't mess with the audio, things can get pretty interesting. So here, for example, I've got a stereo delay. Let's just plug this in, left and right, and then back into here. And I'm going to clock this delay as well, so it'll keep in tempo with precision disruptor. So now this is my raw binaurally spinning audio, and as I apply the delay tails sort of get left in space. So if we follow the quasar around, as I change the timbre, new timbres will appear in new places. As the tails ring out in different places, which I think is pretty cool. Obviously playing with delay time changes the effect considerably, but because it's a digital pristine delay, it doesn't hurt the binaural effect like say a washy reverb might or any other effect. So pretty cool, I think. Next tip or idea is to spin audio around for every step of the sequence. You can do that either with the internal LFO or with an external source. Let's maybe try that first with an external source. I'll plug modulation into CV input 2 and go into this pattern. And then let's say point CV2 into quasar 1 angle. And let's give it a high mod depth. So let's see what happens here. So now I've got these mod values modulating quasar 1's space every other step, which is sort of like this weird swooshing effect. You can turn off auto angle. So it's just this as a mod source. The reverb seems to follow the sound around, which could be a cool swooshing effect, or I could tone it down if I wanted less of it. And like I mentioned, you can also do that with the internal LFO. I'll load up a preset that already does that. Let's go for random on trig. So same deal, get the pattern going, plug clock into CV1, which is the source here to trigger the LFO. And we're moving quasar 1 around. Let's maybe try with some more reverb. Looks pretty nicely, fun effect. So that's another option. And then one final tip, if 2 quasars aren't enough for you, you can of course sample and record audio coming out of the module into anything you like. Here I've sampled a loop into Bitbox Micro. So obviously once you record the audio, panning is preserved perfectly. You can have this loop going in the background while you pan to other sources on top of that in the mix. Okay, let's talk about pros and cons for Quasar. On the pros side, if you're into creating binaural music, And like this particular effect, I think Quasar sounds quite convincing, especially as far as angle and distance are concerned, and at least for me, maybe a little bit less so on height. You tell me what you think in the comments section based on the demos you heard earlier. The module has excellent hands-on controls. It's fun and very easy to use without referencing the manual. Relatively speaking, it doesn't take up too much space, and the LED rings aren't just for show, they serve a useful purpose depending on the mode that you're in. As for cons, I'll start with the hardware side. Probably the biggest issue is price. Not that there's any module to compare this to in terms of price. I'm not aware of any other module at all that's dedicated to binaural panning. If you know of any such module, please comment below. But you can get less expensive software solutions if you're open to a hybrid setup. There are quite a few free and paid binaural software panners. I'll list the ones that I know of below that will obviously cost you less than a hardware module. Setting price aside, another hardware limitation of the module, I think, is that you only get one stereo pair out of the module. It's true that you've got two mono outputs and a headphone stereo output, but they send the same mix to Quasars and the center channel. So you can't multi-track the two Quasars and the center at the same time. You can't record them separately at the same time. You'll either need to record them each separately or live with the mix that you make in real time. If you want to fix mixing decisions later on in post, you're risking hurting the binaural effect. Obviously, you can record the two panners separately or loop them separately and control the mix here. I think that's pretty much it on the hardware side. On the software or firmware side, so maybe things that can be added in the future, again, since there's not much that competes with this in terms of a standalone module, this is certainly market leading, but if I had to complain, I would have liked to see Cartesian or XY control, not just angle and distance, so that potentially with CV I could control location with an external joystick, as opposed to just thinking in terms of angle and distance or height. Even though practically speaking, in terms of just getting things spinning around, this polar approach works better than XY. I also think that an onboard clocked delay effect would have been great to make sure that the signal remains as pristine as possible going out of the module, as opposed to what I have here with an external module post this module. I think this effect adds a lot, by the way. Also, like I mentioned earlier, the reverb spins around as you rotate the Quasar. It's not noticeable if things aren't moving too fast or if they are moving fast if you set reverb to relatively small room sizes, but I sort of feel like I'm nitpicking here because, again, nothing even comes close to this in hardware form, at least as far as I know. Setting that aside, there are general limitations of binaural technology. First, you can only really hear the effect with headphones. And then, like I mentioned earlier, any processing that you apply to the audio coming out of the module is at risk of hurting the binaural effect. Other than that, I think it's a really fun way to make your mix sound wider, obviously, especially if you're using headphones. That's pretty much it for Quasar. If you're into spatial music, whether binaural, quadraphonic, or atmos, you'll find plenty more tips and ideas in my ever-expanding book of electronic music ideas, tips, and tricks, available to the good people who support this channel on Patreon. Hit like if this was useful, and ring the YouTube bell if you want to make sure you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.